Welcome to the Income Flip Podcast. Today we've got Rocky Lalvani. Rocky, welcome. I appreciate having you on the podcast, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Rob. Excited to be here with you.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Well, I want to learn a little bit about you. As I was unpacking a little bit about your background, I see that you are an investor, you're an entrepreneur, you're a profit-first practitioner. And let me tell you, we are big fans of Michael Michalowicz and the Profit First model. And so I thought I would bring you on here so we can learn a little bit more about how our listeners can benefit from Profit First. And, you know, people listening to our podcast, there's all types of real estate entrepreneurs in here. We've got agents, we've got wholesalers, we've got rehabbers, we've got construction. And so, you know, I might ask you some questions based on some of the different avatars that we have within the community. But before we get into that, Rocky, tell us a little bit about you. Who are you?
So, as we started before you hit record, I'm actually from India. I am an immigrant to the United States. Came here at a very young age, parents starting over, so clearly not on the right side of the tracks. But one of the things they did was they would get together with their friends and they would talk about money. And so I just naturally heard people talking about money, about investing in real estate, about business, about negotiations, and kind of they were figuring out the American dream. I didn't realize that people didn't talk about money till much, much later in life, right? As an immigrant, though, one of the things that we were always taught is you're going to be successful. And so it wasn't like, oh, poor us or anything. You were always expected to succeed somewhere along the way. And because I saw people with less money and I saw people with lots of money, I knew where I wanted to be. You know, from the time I was a young kid, I wanted to be a millionaire. And so I was always hustling to make a buck, figuring out what I could do, whether, you know, in the beginning it was paper route, you know, then I got a job. Then I was hustling. I grew up in Jersey. I used to go to New York City, buy stuff wholesale, come back and double the price and sell it to my friends. So I always had cash, right? And I took that cash and I walked into a computer store one day. Now, mind you, this is the early 80s, right? The Apple II just came out. $2,000 is what it cost.
Wow.
Whopping 4K of memory. Like, you know, that's one digit on your phone number in an iPhone, right? And I bought this computer. I walked in with cash and I bought it. And one of the first programs I started playing with was something called VisiCalc. And it was the first electronic spreadsheet. And so adults started to see me and go, wait, you know how to do this? Can you teach our accountants how to get off a paper ledger and start building these spreadsheets? And so I started doing that. And then in college, I got a job in the back office of a bank. And they're like, you know how to do these spreadsheets? I'm like, yeah. They're like, will you just start taking care of our spreadsheets? I'm like, sure, I'll do that. I had no idea what the value of that was. I had no idea that even today, they take all the data out of these big computers, they dump it into spreadsheets, and that's where all the work is done. The problem was, at 21, there was no podcast. There was no how do you start a business? How do you market a business? How do you even tell people I build spreadsheets and turn that into a value proposition? I didn't know those words back then, right? And so I went and I did what you do, and I went to college because I was told I had to, not because I wanted to. It was kind of useless, but whatever. Got an MBA because I was told to. And I had a job, and I made good money, and life was good, but life wasn't great. And I always say good is the enemy of great. Even back then, though, as a kid, you know, because parents still struggle a little bit, if I wanted stuff in the house, we had to do it ourselves. So I learned how to tile, how to paint, how to, you know, frame and run electric and do a roof. And so I learned a lot of the things around real estate. And I was hearing the real estate conversations. And so I was always interested in real estate. I got my real estate license in high school. sold a house.
Wow.
But I never actually, not in high school, in college.
I was like,
Never,
man, you're young.
yeah, I was 19, all right? Still
Yeah.
young.
Yeah, I was very young. Yeah.
But I never actually started investing in real estate until my 40s, and we'll talk about that later. But so that was kind of the background. And, I know we're going to talk about profit first. The principles of profit first I've been doing since I was 21. I got out of college. I understood the power of compounding. I understood how to set up and automate savings. And so I literally just set up all these savings streams, and I literally built wealth. And then after getting wealthy, you start looking around and going, I thought this was supposed to make me happy, and it didn't necessarily do that. So now what? And so that began that second journey. And through that, figured out a lot about life, said I've had enough of this job. What do I really want to do? And spreadsheets and numbers and helping people build wealth was what I decided on. And in investigating that, I learned about profit first. And I was like, this is how I built wealth. Like, I could do this, but I also realized I didn't want to do all the marketing. And you wouldn't have like gone, oh, I want Rocky on the show, had it not been for the profit first label. So I'm like, Mike, you go out and you get that. I'll come in and I'll do the work, and we'll both be happy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, there's power in collaboration. Actually, one of the things that we always say within Grid, our investor network, is the power is in the network. It's in relationships. You're always just one relationship away from changing your entire life. That person could teach you something, could become a business partner, could become a spouse, right? Like, you're just one relationship away. But Rocky, what did you do when you were in your job, right? What kind of job did you have?
I sold drugs for most of my career.
Oh, pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I was in pharmaceutical, medical sales, all of that. And one of the things you learn, and I learned really quickly, was doctors are bad business people, and they don't know how to build wealth. And actually, my original business idea was to teach doctors how to build wealth. Because they have the income, they just don't seem to know how to use it wisely. And so that was kind of...
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Like, what do you think the psychology was? I mean, they come out of school, they're high-income earners, they got a lot of debt from school typically, but what do you think is the piece that has made it so difficult for them? Because I see that too.
No, it's so if you look at it, it becomes very understandable. Number one, they don't get out of school and start earning till they're almost 30, maybe a little bit older. All their friends who were just as smart as them, maybe went to Wall Street, went here, went there, are all driving fancy cars and living a nice life by now. And they've been making, 40 grand and working killer hours and have never been able to enjoy. So there's a lot of pent up demand. So that's one.
That makes a ton of sense.
Okay. Number two is society says you're a doctor, you have to live a certain way. So there is this expectation that they have to live a certain lifestyle. And that's a big part of it. And then number three, they're not taught about money. Even though healthcare represents 20% of the U.S. economy, they are not taught about the business of medicine. And they are not taught how to build wealth. In the industry, like if you go look at the financial services industry, what they're all talking about behind closed doors is the big bullseye target on the back of every doctor, because they know they're a sucker and they're going to come after them for their money. So I think you've got those three things, and maybe some other things come together with ego and attitude, and yeah, it's a perfect mix for people not doing what they should do.
I see that. I see that clearly now. And I have some friends of mine that are doctors, and I saw that pent up demand happen. Right? It's a very real thing. So let's get into profit first. Like, what is profit first?
Profit first is common sense for finances, right? So maybe some of your guys know Dave Ramsey, right? Dave Ramsey popularized the envelope system, but he didn't invent it, right? If you go back, probably 100 years ago, right? People got their money and they took their money and maybe they had envelopes or they had jars and everything had a purpose. So, back then they didn't make what they make today, but they take their bills and go, okay, I got to put money aside for rent and I got to put money aside for groceries. And back then we didn't have credit cards, so people actually had a Christmas club. They put a little money aside for Christmas. And so people would just take their money, at least the smart ones, give each dollar a job, and then send it to do that job. And when that envelope ran out of money, well, there was no money. Suck it up, figure it out, and go forward. And really what that is a constraint system, right? It says, hey, we decided X, and so we're going to do X, whatever that is, with our money. So what Mike did was take that same concept and apply it to business owners. Does everyone know Mike's backstory, the bankruptcy, all that stuff?
No, I mean I know it, but I think it's a great story to tell.
So Mike is a serial entrepreneur, really smart guy. He's got tons of books besides Profit First, all about helping business owners succeed. He actually had a company that did the data forensics for fraud. So like they investigated Enron, they do high profile divorces, all of that stuff. That company made a little money, but it wasn't as profitable as it could be. He sold out, took his money, thought he was a smart business guy, and within 2 years, he literally blew it all to the point that they came for the keys to the house and the car. Now, for those of you who are real estate investors like me, that's not a sad story because that's a deal for us, right? Sorry, Mike. but at the end of the day, for Mike, it wasn't such a great deal. And he's like, how did I screw this up? And so he kind of went through a little bit of depression like we all probably would have. And in there, he realized, hey, wait a minute. My accountant gave me the wrong formula for profit. So we're all told sales minus expenses equals profit. You look at your P&L, right? It's got everything there. And down at the bottom corner is your profit number. It's a leftover. It's an afterthought. It's like we focus on everything above that. And then that's just what happens. And what Mike said, no wonder we're not doing this. Why don't we just do sales minus profit equals expenses? So like if you're doing a deal on a house, you know what your profit's going to be, right? So shouldn't you take your profit first? Shouldn't you say, hey, this is the way it's going to be? And so he changed the equation to sales minus profit equals expenses. He took the same concept of those envelopes and said, well, we're business owners, so we're going to use bank accounts. And basically, in the book are 5 basic accounts, but you got to customize this to you. So in the book is an income account. This is where all your money goes in. So every month or whatever rhythm you use, you can look at your income account and go, I was expecting 50 grand this month. There's about 50 grand in there. Everything is thumbs up. But if you don't have a separate bank account, how do you know 50 grand came in, right? Then you got to start going into software, which nobody wants to do, or adding stuff up. It becomes cumbersome and you're all busy. Then we take that money and then we start separating it for its purposes. So profit, of course, comes first. So we take our profit percentage. You as the owner of a business deserve to get paid. So if you're not paying yourself, you're fooling yourself. So take out your owner's pay. We have to pay taxes unless you're really good with real estate. You're doing depreciation, all of that. I get it. Put money aside for taxes. And now what's left is, hey, this is what my business needs to operate on. This is my OPEX. Now, if you're doing rental real estate or you're doing some other things, we'll have accounts and we can get deeper into that. But by separating the money, every dollar now has a job and you send that dollar to do that job and you live within that constraint. And you don't have to look at your bookkeeping. You don't have to wait for things to get updated. You don't have to figure out spreadsheets. You do what most of you do, which is to look at your bank account. Do I have money? Oh, I can spend. I don't have money. I got to go sell or do something and bring in more.
Tell everybody what Parkinson's law is.
So Parkinson's law basically says you will use up all the time and money allocated for the project. So, for example, let's say we're going to flip a house, right? Your guys all come to you. What's your budget and what's your timeline? Whatever your budget is and whatever your timeline is, that's what it's going to be, right? Plus a little extra, because there's always a little extra. Create margin for that. And that's basically what it is. So if you're going to flip a house and you say the budget's 100 grand, it'll be 100 grand. You say the budget's 50 grand, it'll be 50 grand. You say I need this done in 2 months, it's 2 months. You say I need it done in 2 weeks, well, they got TV shows about that. Somehow they get it done in 2 weeks, right? Because that's what they defined. And if you're thinking I'm a little crazy, then I'll ask you this question. You ever notice how on closing day, that long list of stuff that hasn't gotten done for 3 weeks gets done that last day, right? That's Parkinson's law. Whatever time and money is left, that's what it's going to be. So define it well.
I have a real world example of when I got into this business full time, which was in 2005. We had sold some assets to kind of fund our dream of being real estate investors. And I had an equity line as well on our primary residence of $150,000, right? And I had sold a stake in a business, another business that I owned, and I was a high income earner in that business. So we had, a higher lifestyle than what I should have had as a recently self-employed real estate entrepreneur that didn't have a plan, didn't have a system, didn't have anything, right? And I always tell this story. I went through, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. This was before like YouTube and all this stuff, like all the information that's out there, right? I'm like, I'm just going to go buy properties and generate passive income and live off the passive income. Like, you probably hear that. And I remember very vividly that I did not figure out this business until my equity line was almost 100% tapped, right? I was probably 2 months away from tapping, being fully tapped out. And at that point in time, I figured out how to make money in this business. And I tell everybody, if that equity line if I didn't have one, I would have figured it out sooner. If that equity line had been 500,000, it would have taken me 500,000 to figure that thing out, right? And I can go back and reflect on them. It's like, oh my goodness, like crazy,
And it's true. Like, I don't understand people's behavior with money. People will just ignore it until it gets to the edge, and then all of a sudden they wake up. And for some people like you figured it out 2 months in advance. There's people who go 2 months beyond before they figure it out. Like, they need even more pain to get them going.
Yeah, I reflect back and I was like, what was I thinking, right? Like, what was I thinking? Now, that said, denial, we'll figure it out, optimism, right? But the good news is we figured it out. We then created a great life out of that. And I realized that every entrepreneur kind of goes through this learning, right? The majority of entrepreneurs go through this learning, and pain is a teacher. It's just like, how much pain are you willing to take? And hopefully somebody meets somebody like you ahead of time and says, listen, you don't have to go through all that pain. Let's set this up right from the beginning, right? Which is what I'm sure you do with your clients, right?
It is. The problem is, until people feel pain, they're like, I don't understand what you're saying. They don't get it. They don't get it. And it isn't until they start to feel the pain, and then it becomes, do they want to tell the truth? Do they want to face the truth? And do they want to get naked financially, right? Because that's where it's going to be. And it's different for everybody. But yeah, I mean, that is clearly, and I'll be honest, I've made financial mistakes myself. I think one of the best questions that I ever heard asked was, if you could go back and undo three financial mistakes you made, how much more money would you have today?
Yeah, I remember reading something that Warren Buffett said, a little slightly different, but kind of the same thing. He said if you could only make six financial moves in your entire life, like like you'd be a lot more cautious and careful on what those financial moves would look like, right? And so let me ask you that question. Like, do you have three that you go back and you're like, oh, here are my three, right?
Yeah, I mean, off the top, one, I told you I was doing real estate at a young age, but I didn't buy my investment properties. So had I started buying investment properties pre-2000, like the price differential, astronomical, right? Not to mention a whole bunch of real estate came cheap in the mid 90s with all the bank crashes and everything else. And then I would have ridden the financial interest rates, which are higher than they are today, down all the way. So I would have, won that game too. Another
then
one.
you, then you got a second opportunity in 2008, 2009.
Second opportunity, yes, 2008, and that's when I got in. I got in after '09, and that's when we started buying stuff left and right, because my second mistake had to do with stock market mistakes. And so it's like, all right, you didn't do well, and again, in spite of all these mistakes, the power of compounding works, and if you just stay the course, you will win the game. But you got to stay the course and go through that. I think those were probably the two. The third big one was not starting the business earlier. So missing that whole wave of how powerful my knowledge and ability with spreadsheets was, and what I could turn that into.
Yeah, and then finding joy in that, because there's joy in just building something that's yours and that you like to do, and it's valuable to the marketplace.
So all of that together, 8 figures plus.
Yeah. I look at, and this is, I remember reading this thing with Warren, I followed, when I was 21, 22, I was reading a lot of Warren Buffett stuff. And he was like, buy stock and never sell it. And of course, this was in 1999 and 2000. So I bought stock and I was like, I'm never going to sell it, right? Well, the problem is I bought a lot of .coms that I rode all the way down to zero. And I was like, oh, that could happen? Like, I didn't know that they could go to zero, right? Nobody told me they can go to zero. So then I learned the lesson of like, well, you should have bought the S&P and you should have dollar cost averaged into the S&P. And I was like, right.
Warren doesn't do that.
I know he doesn't do that.
Dave Ramsey, he doesn't make his money the way he says you should make your money.
I know. Well, what happens is you become a specialist at something, and when you become a specialist at something, you can target shoot. And I was not a specialist at that, for sure. Now I am a specialist at real estate, so let's go there real fast. There's different buckets that I would imagine you'd want to set up if you owned rental property versus fixing and flipping. And maybe you can talk about some of the nuances between those two.
So do you want to do, because the other one is wholesaling. Should we look at all three?
Yeah. Okay.
Let's
look at all three. Let's do that.
So if we look at a wholesaling business, right, not capital intensive, right? It could be capital intensive if you're actually doing a double close or holding it for a short period of time. But your capital is quick and you can get loans. There's people out there that will loan you that shortfall. So when I look at a wholesaling business, I look at that as a marketing business. And most wholesalers spend a ton of money in two areas. One is on the marketing side, so all the advertisements across multiple channels and so forth. And then the second thing is on their sales and closing team. right? And then they get what is left. So when I look at a company like that, my question is, what percent are you spending on marketing? And as part of that, like if we looked at profit first in that, I would want a marketing bucket so that every time I made a sale, if I spent 15% on marketing, I would automatically fund my marketing account with 15% so that I know here's the 15% I'm going to target towards marketing and I'm going to use it. Now, that said, we really want to dig into the weeds on marketing. You've got 6 different channels, for example. Which channel's working? What's the cost per lead? What's the close ratio? Like, you got to have somebody tracking and mathing that all out so that you know what the first part of the math looks like. And then the second part of that math is, how are our salespeople and closers doing? And I want to know by person, hey, this one got 30 leads, turned 30 leads into 3 sales. This one got 30 leads, turned it into 6 sales. This one got 30 leads and turned it into 1. Clearly there's a problem, right? And you got to adjust. But if you're not tracking that and you don't know that, you think everything's okay because the averages are okay, but there's probably tons of money wasted. So in the wholesaling business, that's kind of what I always want to do. And I always want to have leading indicators. How many leads are coming in the door? What's our current close ratio? What are we closing this month? So really good dashboards. I know there's plenty of companies out there that create dashboards for the wholesaling industry. Perfect. Like, use it, utilize it, and keep your thumb on the pulse every single week, because that business goes like this, right? COVID hits, the rules change. Interest rates go up 0.5%, the rules change. Things are always happening, right? Different areas, different things happen. So I think that's the way I look at that business.
Okay, that makes
Does
a lot
that-
of sense. Yeah, that makes.
all right.
Yeah, I've always said wholesaling is a marketing business, so you need to, make sure that you have enough in that marketing kitty, and you got to take it off every single time you do your first deal. Like, I always teach people, listen, first you're going to prospect, network, and market. And market's always last, right? Like, prospecting and networking is going to get you some of your first original deals. You then earn the right to spend money on marketing, but you need to take a certain percentage, whatever that percentage is in your particular business, and allocate it towards that marketing business. Yeah. What about fixing and flipping?
So fixing and flipping, in this business, everybody throws out all kinds of numbers, and there's a whole lot of positive attitude is what I'll call it, right? So I think the first thing is, when you're going to do a deal, is to reverse engineer the deal. So we always start with the after repair value that we think we're going to get. Now, what I do is I build in margin at every part, because things always go wrong. So in our area, we also have a transfer tax. So what we do is, okay, this is what I think the after repair value is. Let's say it's $200,000. I immediately take 10% off the $200,000 just for closing costs. That might be seller's help, last minute repairs, the realtor's commission, and the transfer tax. And so now I know, okay, 10% off, I'm at 180. Now I know what my minimum profit is. Let's just say, for argument's sake, the profit there is 30,000. So now I know that we got to get the deal done for 150. So if I go in and I look at this property and I say, if I look at all the repairs and I look at the holding costs and everything else that's going on, I think for this house it's going to be $40,000. Okay? Now I know that I have to buy that house at 110 or less, and as much less as possible as I can get for it. That is the most important thing to do. Once you set your budgets, then you have to measure against your budgets. So when you actually finish the property, you should know, hey, we bought it at the right price, because we know that up front. This was our budget for the repairs, and I want them broken out in major categories. So figure it out for yourself. Don't get crazy. I don't need a million line items, but what are the 5 or 8 largest expenses that you're looking at? How did you do compared to what you said you were going to do? How did that work out? And by the way, we didn't even talk about funding costs. Like if you've got to borrow the money, we need to put the funding cost into that. And so now you're going to have to get an even better deal if you're paying $10,000 or whatever for hard money. So don't forget to do that. And then we're always comparing. Are our numbers right, or where did it break down? Was my ARV wrong? Was my repair costs wrong? How did all of that go, and how quickly did I flip it? Now, once you get your profit, okay, I think we said $30,000. How are we divvying up our profits, right? How much of that are you using? If you're using hard money, are you going to use some of that money to start to build your own lending fund so you can lend yourself money instead of paying somebody else money? How much are you going to just have reserves in case crap happens, right? How much are you going to pay yourself? And how much are you putting aside for taxes? So once you get your $30,000, you can't just go blow it all. You've got to set money aside for these different things. Again, come up with your percentages. There's no right number. There's the number that works for your business model, and start putting that money aside. So, the easy thing for profit first when that one comes is you're going to get a final check that's going to be net of everything. You just take your final check and you split it up amongst whatever those accounts are. Now, some people who do fix and flips also do marketing to find their deals. So again, if that's the case, and maybe we only have a 5% marketing budget, let's put our 5% of that leftover amount we'll put aside for marketing. Are there other costs you think people might want to set money aside for in that case?
Well, I mean, if you're gonna, it depends on employee count. It depends on a lot of different things. But I have a different question based on what you just said, right? So you've got this 30,000 that you made in profit on that one project, and you're gonna take that 30,000, and before you spread it out, you got to dump it into one account first, right?
Yes.
And the name of that account, just so everybody knows, is
that's the income account.
That's the income account. Okay.
Yes.
So go from there, right? So from there, it's like your marketing account. It's going to be your profit account. It's going to be your tax account, right?
And if you are running a flipping business where you have overhead and people, then you need an operating account, and probably a good chunk of that 30,000 goes to operating overhead. And 100%. So you're going to put a chunk there for that too.
Yeah. So that's where you need to go back and look at your P&Ls and say, what have been my operating expenses? Can I actually constrict some of those based on what I'm learning here? Can I benchmark against what the very best in the world are doing? I'm a big fan of that, right? I'm a big fan of going into Facebook groups and asking everybody, hey, what's your COGS? What are your expenses? And then you have to also understand what the size of that business looks like, because the size of the business is going to determine a lot of that. And know that, what would you say, Rocky? Like 8 out of 10 of the posts are going to be like really off and wrong because people just don't get this shit right? It's true. But there's going to be a couple people in there that have their businesses dialed in. And you'll know because they'll be able to kind of really define and explain why. And people are happy to share. So you want to try to pay attention to who those people are. What could you add to that?
No, I think that's very true. But the one thing is, we always want to be better than the benchmark.
Oh, yeah.
Because average sucks.
Average sucks. Well, that's why I said, what are the very best in the world doing? Yep. And that becomes the benchmark, right?
Yeah.
Of what the best are doing.
And I think it's what you said, though. I find in the real estate space, there's a lot of chest thumpers, and they don't know their numbers. Mm-hmm. They have no clue. And part of it is they have messy bookkeeping. And what I mean by that is, their guys go to Home Depot and they buy all this stuff, Is anyone tracking what house that went to? Mm-hmm. Is anyone putting?
Oh, I've
those
been
things...
there.
Well, and that's the thing. And then there's the, like, I've flipped houses, right? I have rentals. I'm like, why hasn't the HVAC guy sent me a bill? It's been 3 months, right? And you think you're profitable, but you forgot to pay for the HVAC because he hasn't sent you a bill for 3 months because somehow he's independently wealthy, or actually he just has no idea how to bill.
Yeah, you'll love this. I got a bill on a survey 2 years after I had done the survey. I guess somebody went back to audit the books and they're like, "We never sent the bill out for this," right? And I had totally forgotten about it. Yeah, so that means
I still haven't gotten the final cleaning bill on the last house we sold a couple of years ago.
Yeah, which is wild. So, those are they are small business owners too, and they struggle with their books and they're trying to figure it out. I think maybe that's a message that I want to give everybody, is that most entrepreneurs, especially in the beginning, like, their books are really messy. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to get naked with somebody that is a real estate financial expert, because I'm telling you, the majority of real estate investors that I talk to, I could ask them 2 or 3 basic questions and I already know, hey, there's a mess in there, and it's okay. That's part of the journey. What advice do you give people that are in that mess right now, Rocky?
Clean it up. By the way, I'm going to say this. It's not just little business owners. There's actually a study of Fortune 500 companies, okay? It was done by an MIT professor. The book is Jonathan Burns. The book is called Islands of Profit, I think, in a Sea of Red Ink. So he looked at Fortune 500 companies, and they actually went into the company and started looking at where their profit was coming from. 20 to 30% of what they did produced 80 to 100% of the profit. 20 to 30% of what they did lost money, and the remaining stuff broke even. But nobody knew, on average, what 20 to 30% was making money. Nobody was going to raise their hand and say, "I'm the money loser." And no president, CEO of a company had the balls to go to Wall Street and go, "We're cutting sales by 70% and we're going to make twice as much money next year," because he'd be fired. So this is just, it's an everybody problem.
Well, it's interesting. Steve Jobs went into Apple the second time around, and that's what he did. He got rid of something like 140 different product lines and narrowed it down to 7, and he said, "We're going to be the best in the world at these 7." And that was a hard thing to do. He had to turn it around. I think they were like 30 or 60 days away from burning through all their cash, right? Hard decisions. Yeah. You got to make those hard decisions.
And I think that's what it is. Number one, get clarity on your financials. Figure out where's your money coming and going. The gut is wrong, right? When you start actually looking at the numbers, everyone is constantly shocked. I didn't know all my leads for my wholesaling were actually coming from over here.
Yeah.
I've been wasting 80% of my marketing budget. I didn't know that. Or when it comes to flipping, they're like, "Well, every house we flipped, the $50,000 budget turned into 65. No wonder we have a cash flow crunch," right?
Yeah.
And it's just having clarity on that and actually looking at the numbers. And I'll tell you, I've seen the numbers of some very big guys in this space, and I've looked at their books, and I've talked to them. They still don't have a clue what's there. They think they're doing X, but the numbers tell me they're doing Y, and the bottom line tells me something totally different than what they're thinking. But because money is moving everywhere, nobody's really got an idea of what clearly is happening.
Dashboards. Dashboards are your friend.
They are.
Do you build your own dashboards? Do you API into other dashboards? Do you have them custom built?
So what we use a standard underlying framework. And that framework grabs the basic data and it presents it in a way that makes sense for us. On top of that underlying framework, we build our own custom dashboards. And then those dashboards will pull data from disparate places depending on how they want to do it. Yeah, you can do it via APIs. Small people can just do it. Like a lot of the stuff, it literally takes you 15 minutes once a month to just grab the same data from everywhere, put it in one place, and then ponder it and go, huh, look at that trend. Look at what's happening here. Look at that average. Look at that. And comparing that to the target, right? So you've been to a football game? You enjoy football?
It's okay.
It's okay, right? So they got that whole thing once a year. Everyone watches the Super Bowl, right?
Yes, yes.
You imagine that we're going to have a Super Bowl game, and this year we're going to do it different. This year, we're not going to have lines on the field, okay? You just figure out where you are. We're also not going to have a clock, right? So I don't know what quarter it is, and I don't know what, the clock on the field to say how quickly you got to throw. Those guys with those yard markers, we're going to send them home, right? So, we know where the ball is. And by the way, we don't need a scoreboard, right? So we'll put the score in our head, right? Who is going to watch this game? Right?
Nobody.
A bunch
That
of
is
guys
such a
drinking,
great...
going, that was over the line. No, it wasn't. The score's 20-8. No, it isn't. Like, brawl.
Yeah.
And yet, how many people run their business like this?
Oh, the majority.
The majority.
The majority.
Yeah.
Rocky, that is such a great analogy, right?
It is. There's 4 quarters in a football game, just like there are in a year.
Yeah.
Right? We know where we are on the field. We know what we need to do to hit the goal line. Right?
Yeah, we
and
know if we're winning. We know if we're losing. We know how much time. Yeah.
And sometimes in real estate, we got to punt the deal. Sometimes we got to do the field goal and get out quick, take a small number and be done. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
life.
game.
Oh, shoot. Football is real estate. Real estate investing. That's crazy. I got a new appreciation now. I'm in love with it. Right? No, that's fantastic. It's so true. Right? I think...
Hey, I got a question. How many of your guys who are owners interfere in the business a lot?
No, none of my owners interfere in our business. Okay. Right?
Not in yours, but what you see with people. Like, how many of them get too involved and micromanage their people?
No, actually, so let me go back. When you start talking about that piece of the business, I see that happen quite often, even in my business, right? My sales leaders micromanaging other people whose jobs are to do those things, and it drives me crazy.
So let's go back to football, right? You're the coach, right? Because you're the business owner.
Mm-hmm.
You send in the play. It's the end of the game. This is for the big win. This is for the Super Bowl. You're down by 4, and you send your quarterback in to do the pass. Guys get out on the field. Quarterback goes back, right? End zone is wide open. The problem is your receiver's on the wrong side of the field. So the coach goes, I got to fix this. He runs out on the field. He goes down to the end zone. He catches the ball. He's waiting for the applause. Half the field is booing. The refs are throwing yellow flags, right? And yet, how many of us as business owners try and make the play when we've got people on the field? That's not your job.
Yeah,
you got to let it be.
That's so good. I mean, that is, I think, one of the biggest. We teach this framework. It's called the seven levels of wealth. Level 1 is like all the mind garbage. Level 2 is creating predictable income, getting people to understand how to ring the bell, create predictable income. And that's really sales dashboard numbers. Level 3 is becoming a business owner. And that is one of the biggest challenges I see, that self-employed people who feel like they are the best thing And right, we got Michael Gerber that wrote the E-Myth around this. But they're constantly trying to micromanage or do somebody else's job. Like, you will never grow a business unless you're empowering other people to be able to play their role, to play their position on the field. And if you've got the wrong person playing that position in the field, you've got to go out and recruit to that position, but you don't jump in to do that role, right? It
Getting
is
benched.
they're getting it is one of the
Have a
biggest
deep
opportunities.
bench, right?
Yes.
Have a deep bench. And having the deep bench doesn't mean they're on your payroll. That means that you're having conversations so that when the opening comes up, you're ready to call the guy in.
100%. 100%. Yeah, every business eventually just realizes they are in the recruiting and people development business.
Yeah, and training.
Yeah.
And marketing.
Yeah, you need the talent is. I remember when I was younger, you would hear this. The difference are our people, and I was always like, oh, that sounds so whatever. And like, the right people make all the difference. The right people, let me just kind of go back to this one piece, Rocky. As you were talking, when I first started, I remember I knew I needed to hire a bookkeeper because I didn't know anything about anything. And I chose the least expensive option because I felt like, well, I don't have a lot of money, so I'm just going to go for the cheap option. And 6 months, 8 months later, somebody's doing my books. I don't know if they're doing it right or not because I don't know anything about books. I come to discover that it's all wrong. And, I remember I chose between and this was a long time ago, so I chose between the $60 an hour person and the $30 an hour person. I went for the $30 an hour person. I eventually had to go get the $60 an hour person to fix all the $30 an hour work, right? And it was a mess. And one of the things I learned in that was find partners that are pros at what they do and pay them because you think like it is an investment in your time, an investment in your business, an investment in everything and upgrading everything. And don't go to the inexpensive cheap route. It's kind of like what I learned, right? So,
and I agree with that. The other thing is, and I learned this flipping houses. Don't ask your roofer to lay carpet.
Yeah, that's right. Specialist.
Okay? Yeah. And the reason I say that is bookkeepers have a job and they're good at that job, hopefully. Tax CPAs have a tax job and they're good at that, okay? But none of those people is going to tell you how to run a profitable real estate business because that's not their job. That's not the role they play. And I think what people don't realize is just like when you're working on a house, you got a roofer and a window guy and a carpet guy and a tile guy. Each of those people, while they're in the finance space, are just like all of those people that are in the real estate rebuild space, but they're all doing what they do. And if you don't understand their role, you're going to end up with the wrong advice because they're only looking at it from their point of view. They got a hammer and everything they see is a nail. And maybe you don't need a nail at the moment.
Well, Rocky, if people wanted to get a hold of you to learn a little bit more about what you do, where do they go?
Can I ask your audience a favor first?
Sure.
If you guys have enjoyed what Rob brings you, you got value out of it, let me ask you a question. When's the last time you hit the like button? Right? Have you shared this with another real estate investor so that you guys can have a conversation about, hey, did you hear that? What do you think about that? Can we do that? Have you done that? Like, that's how you begin conversations. And it's another way to say thank you to Rob. So after you go say thank you to Rob, whatever player you're on, go find the Profit Answer Man. That's my podcast. We teach all of this stuff in detail. We've got shows on real estate. We've got shows on business. We've got shows on marketing, all of that kind of stuff. And you can learn for free. Check it all out. It's all there.
I love that, Rocky. And thank you so much. I appreciate that. I got a question for you. Like you have you talk to a lot of different businesses out there, and it sounds like you also focus a lot on marketing ROI. Is that right? Right.
Look, at the end of the day, right? Nothing happens until cash changes hand. Cash doesn't change hands until you make the sale. So sales and marketing for every company is the lifeblood of the money coming in. So we got to get money into the bucket. And then part two is making sure the bucket isn't full of leaks, that the money is leaving faster than it's coming in. When we can get both of those parts right, you make tons and tons of money. So, and I come from a sales background, so I understand sales market. And when I look at the numbers, I'm like, I think the number one largest area where money is wasted is in sales and marketing.
Overhead of people or dollars spent on frivolous, the 80% that doesn't make him anything because they haven't paid attention to the 20% that does, or a combo.
Yeah, they're like, I need leads. Put up Facebook ads. What? Or at the same point, salespeople are salespeople, and a lot of salespeople are good at selling you on hiring them, but they may not be so good at selling what you've got to sell. And so I think those are the two biggest concepts where you got to measure and you got to verify. Are we getting a return on our investment? Bottom line.
Yeah, every person in our organization on the sales side has a scoreboard, right? They've got a scoreboard, and we know what their conversion is for self-set appointments, so business that they generate on their own, and for ISA appointments that are inside salespeople generate for them. And some people are really good on their self-set, and they're just terrible at the ISA set appointments. And some people are really good with those ISA set appointments on conversion, and we just give more to them. And if you didn't have a scoreboard or a dashboard telling you that, you just wouldn't know, right?
No.
So I'm a big fan. Go out and research or create scoreboards for pretty much every role in the organization, and you'll start really enjoying the data and the numbers. And that's what makes it fun, for sure. Well, Rocky, thank you so much for sharing time with Grid and the entire community. I really appreciate it. And again, give us the name of the podcast.
Profit Answer Man.
Awesome. Profit Answer Man. That's where you get to look them up. Thank you, Rocky.
Thank you.